Hello and welcome. My name is Andrea Lopez, and I am a first year student intern at the UC Santa Cruz American Indian Research Center, and I am Lakota. I am honored to be here today with all of you at the Amah Mutsun Speaker Series event, honoring our past and celebrating our future, a conversation with Amah Mutsun tribal member college students. This special program will highlight 6 Amah Mutsun college students who will discuss their experiences in higher education, share about their research, and how they hope to serve the community after completing their degree programs. The purpose of the Amah Mutsun Speaker Series is to raise awareness about the issues that impact Native Americans and California natives in particular. The Speaker Series board is comprised of Amah Mutsun tribal band members, AIRC staff, and UCSC faculty. The AIRC is dedicated to supporting the needs of American Indian students at UC Santa Cruz. It is one of 6 research centers on campus. The AIRC is also home to the People of Color Sustainability Collective. Throughout the year, we host workshops and presentations that raise awareness about issues that pertain to Indigenous peoples. Please join me in welcoming Amah Mutsun Tribal Band Chairman, Valentin Lopez.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to our spring 2021 Amah Mutsun Speaker Series. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mountain Maidu, excuse me, the Valley Miwok, and I'm talking to you from Galt, California, and Galt is just south of Sacramento. And our traditional territory is in the territory of the Amah Mutsun people, which is today known as Morgan Hill, Gilroy, Hollister, and Hollister. Our Amah Mutsun, the Amah Mutsun Speaker Series was developed to present on current issues that are important to and impact California Indians today. The Speaker Series presents twice a year. In the spring, we have a spring event and we have a fall event. The Speaker Series started in spring of 2009. We're very proud of that. This is our 25th consecutive Mutsun Speaker Series event without fail. Our tribe, it's important that our tribe follow through with our commitments and our obligations and to keep good things happening and going forward. And that's what we're here for today. In that period of time, we have presented on such topics as historic trauma and healing, language, federal recognition, honoring Indigenous thought, survivance, and resilience, restoring balance in the environment, restoring balance in ourselves. We talked about the Indian Child Welfare Act and how unrecognized tribes are not part of it and how we have been greatly impacted by the foster care system and adoptions. We also talked about ethnobotany, land restoration, and traditional Indigenous stewardship. Shortly after I was elected chairman in 2003, I attended a conference in the Bay Area. And there, during the introductions, there was a person there who was a recruit, said that for 23 years, he was a recruiter for a very large tribe. And he'd go to the various sites of the tribe, and he tried to recruit the best and the brightest of their students and get them placed in places such as Harvard and Stanford and Yale and Princeton, etc. And he was very successful. He got a lot of the students accepted there. And then after 23 years, he looked at his reservation and he realized that all the best and the brightest people had left the reservation. And they did, and once they left, they never came back. And he said, that today, whenever he was, talking, he said today he has stopped recruiting the youth. And he tells them, instead of going away to the universities and stuff like that, stay here and work for your people. Your people need you. And they need your leadership in the future. And I found that just shocking. And I was sitting there and I was telling myself, we have to make sure that does not happen to the Amah Mutsun. It would be so easy. It would be just so darn easy to get our people placed in colleges, they go away and they're gone, and to feel, and then feel good. But what about the tribe? What about our future? So we started talking to the youth. We started inviting them to specific wellness meetings that we hold, and told them the importance of living with their culture, of knowing their culture, knowing who they are, knowing our path and our obligations and our responsibilities to our members, to our ancestors, to our future generations, to our descendants, and to Creator, and to carry that with you every day, and to make your decisions with your heart and not with your mind. Make your decisions based on your culture. And over the years, we had a lot of conversations with a lot of our people, a lot of our youth, and that continues to today. A lot of the speakers who are going to be talking today are very active in our youth, our youth leadership committee, and they are working with the youth today to help them stay involved with the tribe, to know our culture, our history, our obligations, etc. And I'm so proud of our young leaders today and of our members of tomorrow. So today we're going to have 6 of our tribal, I was going to call them youth, but they're adults now. And I'm so proud of our young adults and what they're pursuing with their cultures, I mean, with their education. And they're going to talk today, and they're going to tell you what their interests are, their paths growing up and how it led to higher education, what they're doing today, and what they hope to do tomorrow with their careers. I believe that the future for the Amah Mutsun tribe is very bright, very optimistic, very hopeful. The people you talk today will be the future leaders of our tribe, along with others. We have an Amah Mutsun Stewardship Corps. Our stewards are leaders in our tribe as well, and they work with the scholars you see today. And they are learning to restore the indigenous knowledge of our ancestors and to carry on our knowledge. And it's important to blend those two, to blend the culture and the current day formal education processes. To be successful, we need to understand both knowledges, but we need to lead with our culture. So for today's event, we have six of our 6 speakers. I'll introduce the first speaker, and then when she's done with the presentation, she'll introduce the next speaker. And at the end, we'll have time for question and answer. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and she will give her background. I'll just introduce her as the speaker. And so that's Athena Hernandez. Thank you.
I just want to make sure, can you hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Mishmin Druhis Kanrakat Athena Hernandez. Good afternoon. My name is Athena Hernandez. So first I'll give a little bit about my background and my reason for going to law school. So I just graduated from Golden Gate University School of Law last week, actually, with my Juris Doctorate degree. And I did the full-time day program, which is 3 years. I'm now studying for the California bar exam in July. It's a 2-day exam, July 27th and 28th. So when I, was first when I first decided I wanted to go to law school, when people learned about, my interests and desires as far as practicing law someday, I got a lot of unsolicited advice. And a lot of those, unfortunately, were just kind of repeating, misconceptions that people had about lawyers, maybe, perception that they had seen in the media and TV and things like that. And a lot of what I heard was that, lawyers are, they're liars. And actually, one person told me they're the most miserable people that they know is their friends who study law. That they, are only interested in money, and that, it's always about loopholes and things like that. So I just want to say, if there's, any students on the call who are prospective law students who are thinking about, going down that path, just know that that is absolutely not true, at least in the space and the experiences that I've had thus far. They're lawyers who fight the good fight, and that is primarily the type of law and the area of law that I'm interested in, and that I feel is that does good work and are good people. So I chose to go to law school to be able to advocate for my family and the various communities we belong to. I learned early on in life that the law tends to be administered unequally and adversely for my communities, which happen to be historically marginalized communities of color. I also learned, when I was 18, I learned that my family was actually, up until that point, below the poverty line. So, and I learned also that the law largely favors those with financial resources. So basically, I saw myself going to law school as being able to provide agency, in the face of something that is really complex, like the American legal system. So agency, and kind of wield some of that power for my family and our communities. So I'll talk next a little bit about my path to law school. I took a few years off in between undergrad before applying to law school. And of course, because of, the communities I shared that I belong to, historically marginalized communities, prospective students who are looking to enter higher education do face a lot of barriers. There's a lot of gatekeeping involved in higher education, and especially in law school. And one of those barriers is financial resources. The other is, being a first generation college student and not having proximity to other attorneys or other people who went down that path. And that was certainly true of my experience. I didn't have either of those. So unfortunately, students of color have to be very resourceful. So I really relied on my alma mater, St. Mary's College, in helping to answer a lot of the questions that I had about law school. And so, of course, the Indian Resource Center at UCSC, things like that is what I really leaned on to help me get my application materials together and answer a lot of those questions and sort of demystify the process. So my law school advisor, previous professors that I had established really good rapport with, really helped me. And I also just asked as many questions as I could. I also really quickly want to mention that something that's not commonly known, which I really like to share this like far and wide, is that you can actually get a full scholarship still in this day and age to law school. And that's actually what I did. I was offered a full ride scholarship for all 3 years from Golden Gate University. And I found out that if you apply to schools where the average student of that law school is below your stats, so you are more of a competitive, you're kind of on the higher end, that you have not only a really great chance of getting in, but a really great chance of getting offered a scholarship. So I was really fortunate to get offered that full ride. Another misconception about law school is that you study a certain type of law in your courses. And I guess that, that could kind of be true. You can get certifications, but one of the big ways that you are able to really focus your expertise and your practical experience that you gain through in law school is through internships. So I think the average law school student does 2 or 3. It's typically in the summers of a 3-year program. So that's 2. Sometimes it's 3. I wanted as much experience as I could get to really make myself competitive at the end of law school. And so I did 6 internships. I knew early on, because of the way the criminal justice system has affected my family in the past, I knew that criminal law was something I wanted to go into. But my experience has varied outside of that. So I've had internships in the public sector working for local government. And that was at 2 different public defenders' offices in the Bay Area. I have also worked for the Homeless Advocacy Project in San Francisco, and my clients were facing homelessness, eviction, and things of that nature, and I advocated on their behalf. The last 2 externships I had were they were judicial externships. So I interned at the California Supreme Court last summer, and that's a non-advocate role. So that's a neutral body. You're not advocating for plaintiff or defendant. And then similarly, my last one was for a federal judge for the Northern District of California. So that judge was based out of Oakland. Some ongoing projects I have, so that is my practical experience, and that's certainly where I see myself. But the great thing about, having this legal knowledge and skills is that you can really lend your volunteer time in really huge ways to other organizations. So outside of my professional, practical work experience, I have a lot of different avenues that I've sort of lended my time just as a volunteer because I believe in their causes. So one of them is the Race and Justice Task Force at Golden Gate. In the wake of George Floyd's state-sanctioned murder last year, many organizations and academic institutions started, having this sort of racial reckoning. Are we creating an inclusive environment for our students of color? Is it equitable? Are we gatekeeping? And so Golden Gate certainly did that. And so students, myself included, came together with professors and created the Race and Justice Task Force, which really reevaluates every single practice, every single classroom, everything we teach, and puts a DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice lens on that to see if, the environment we are creating is one that supports students of color. And so that is something that is ongoing and that I will continue to help as an alum. Another thing that is really in the introductory stages, but which I'm really excited about is I talked to Val about getting resources, in the form of legal students and their research to help us, establish things that legal defenses or a legal case for a lot of the land rights we were looking to get, that, land that belongs to us, but that, there are a lot of legal barriers too. And so it's in the works, establishing an internship program at GGU, wherein law students receive academic credit for their research and volunteer work with our tribe. And, in exchange, the tribe receives that legal research and knowledge and wherewithal that we are really needing, but don't necessarily have, this huge budget for. And we kind of get it for free through the volunteer work of those legal students. Another thing that I have taken on, that is just really interesting, and I feel so fortunate to be in this legal space, is a working group called the Rights of Nature Working Group. And that is where basically a team of lawyers has come together and said, we want to honor Indigenous peoples and their principles in preserving land and in sustaining land and in caring for the environment. And so we are seeking to legally give rights to nature, to bodies of water, bodies of land, things like that. So that's, again, in its like embryonic stages, but that is going to be a really interesting endeavor, something I'm very proud to be a part of. Another thing that I, will continue to do with my tribe and my legal knowledge and skills is just to advocate however I can for my tribe. Unfortunately, our existence is subject, in the eyes of the law, is subject to and in part dictated by local, state, and federal law. And of course, it concerns Indian law, but also property law. And so now that I have those skills, that knowledge, I can advocate for my tribe in that way. And of course, I do want to point out, having legal, everyone always asks, oh, are you federally recognized? Is the tribe federally recognized? It doesn't legitimize our tribe, to have legal federal recognition or what have you, because we know our history, our ancestry, and, who we are. But, this modern world requires of us that we have, certain things that we are recognized by the law in certain ways. So, going forward, I just plan to apply my legal knowledge, skills, and really my legal network I've acquired to help overcome the legal barriers that our tribe might face in the future. So that's a little bit about me, and I think we are going to take questions at the very end if you have any. The next speaker you'll hear from is one of my amazing cousins, Julisa Lopez.
Thank you, Athena. I'm just gonna, I have a little PowerPoint, so I'm gonna share my screen. Great. So hi everyone, my name is Julisa Lopez and I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. I'm heading into my 4th year now, and I'm also a UCSC alum, and I was an intern at the American Indian Resource Center for 3 years. And a majority of my time there is actually the lead intern for the Amah Mutsun speaker series. So I'm really, really excited to be back and share what I've been doing since I left in 2018. So I just want to start with a little bit of background about who I am. I'm a first-generation college student. I'm the oldest out of 3 girls. So you can see me and my sisters here in the top left with my mom. And I grew up in Fresno, California. And so being a first-gen college student, like Athena said, we didn't always have the academic resources or tools to support us as we navigated these academia. But what we did have is a lot of love and support and a huge community that uplifted us and instilled in us cultural values that really shaped a lot of the reasons why I decided to attend college. So as a ceremonial dancer growing up, I was given the responsibility to protect and lead younger generations. And even the way that our dance floor is set up here, you can see the purpose of protection the women hold. So the men are in the middle carrying up the prayers to Creator through the fire smoke, and the women are on the outside of the circle protecting the men. So as a matriarchal society, those values were really instilled in me at a young age. So really that obligation to protect and serve for future generations. And so I ran with that and decided like that was my fuel to attend college, right? That fulfilling that obligation. And so I ended up applying and getting accepted to UC Santa Cruz right after high school. And this is actually me and Val at my first ever AIRC event that I attended as a freshman. In my first year, I was really fortunate that Val introduced me to Dr. Hernandez. And Dr. Hernandez was actually the first person I met with a PhD besides Ross from Friends. So that was my reference point my whole life. And then coming to UC Santa Cruz, I really got to shift what a person with a PhD looks like to me. So I worked at the American Indian Resource Center for 3 years, and I was also a research assistant for Dr. Rebecca Covarrubias here, one of the other people that really reshaped what I thought about when I thought about a PhD. And so I worked at in the social psychology lab with Dr. Rebecca, and really through my experiences as a research assistant and as a intern at the American Indian Resource Center, really shaped my decision to pursue a PhD in social psychology, but in particular cultural psychology. So like I said, I'm at the University of Michigan, and I'm currently working with Dr. Stephanie Freiberg down here. And at the like most highest basic level, cultural psychology is the study of how people's thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors are shaped by their culture and society. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this field to explore different questions that you might have as a researcher. When I came to UC Santa Cruz as a first-gen student, I didn't know what it meant to be at a research institution. I didn't even know the difference between a state college and a four-year, research institution. And it wasn't until I got a research assistantship that I really started realizing like, wow, I can use research to ask questions that are important to my community. So the way I orient myself in my field is that I look out into the world, I look at social issues that Native people are facing, and I try to find solutions for them, or at least find an understanding of why that might be happening. So just to give you a couple of examples of projects that I've worked on. So a social issue you might be familiar with is the Native mascot debate. Since the 1960s, Native people have been protesting and advocating against Native mascots. But despite these years of protests, their voices are often silenced in mainstream media. And instead, we see headlines like Daniel Snyder says he'll never change the name. Or even worse, false narratives being uplifted and perpetuated. And so in 2016, the Washington Post actually collected data. They sent out a survey online. 500 people responded, self-identified natives. So that can range from like people like me and you to people that are 164th Cherokee, or people that have a great, great, great ancestor that was native at one point, right? So we really didn't know who was answering this question, do you find the team name offensive? Even though they didn't have those like rigorous methods of collecting the data, this narrative really, this is what people were focusing on. And it was especially harmful because this was during the time that there was a Supreme Court case, Amanda Blackhorse versus the Washington team, to remove the Redskins name. And so once this data came out, it was really cited as effectively killing the debate. Look, Native people don't find it offensive. Why are we still having this conversation? So in order to correct the narrative, our research team actually partnered with Illuma Native, which is a national organization And we collected data from 1,000 Native participants. And we hired a polling service to actually recruit Native participants and do some quality control when collecting the data to make sure that we're getting, like, I guess you could say, actual Natives, not pretendians, right? And what we found are very different results. We found that 49% of Native people actually find the team name offensive. And yes, it's true, 38% did not find it offensive. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it really shows the diversity across Native America, that we don't all think the same. We don't all have to, think the same way about different issues. Um, and so, what's different about our study versus the Washington Post is that our data collection and our write ups of the data actually has to go through a peer reviewed process. So, other scientists have to go through our data and make sure, okay, this meets the scientific rigor and standards that we have in our field. It can be published in an academic journal rather than just an online survey posted, just to, getting self-identified people participating. And we didn't just stop there. We wanted to understand, okay, so if some natives find it offensive and some don't, why? What is explaining that? So what we did is we asked people, here you can say engagement with Native culture and identity centrality. These are two different measures. So we asked them on a scale from 1 to 7, how much do you engage in your culture? Do you attend ceremonies? Do you eat your cultural foods? Do you hang out with elders? Do you sing your songs? And how much do you find your culture important to you? Do you find it central to you? Is it a part of your identity that you really hold important? And we asked them, how offensive do you find the Redskins team name? Do you find it not offensive, so a 1, or really offensive, a 7? And what we were able to find is that people that are really connected with their culture, so people that are scoring a 7 and people that are really engaged with their culture, those are the ones that found the Redskins name most offensive. And so that really shows that for the people that their culture is important, they're going to be the ones most impacted by this. So those are the voices we should be uplifting in this conversation. Another project that I've worked on is, again, with Illuminative. I'm actually a research consultant for them and was hired on to do a advocate's guide for supporting Indigenous Peoples Day. So I got a great task at being able to interview community leaders across the nation and ask them about their experiences changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day in their, at their high school, at their state, in their county. And I got to interview people from tribal youth committees to senators in New Mexico to artists in Montana. It was a really diverse set of people. And with those interviews, I was able to write them up, create this little guide for people that are currently advocating to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, and provide some tips and talking points. So you can actually access this guide online. Another research report that I had worked on was through the Indigenous Future Survey that some of you might have seen me post on our tribal Facebook group. We collected data last summer, and we were able to collect 6,000 responses from Native people across the nation. And with those responses, we wanted to understand the impact of COVID-19 and its impact on Indigenous peoples. And so with this report, we really unpacked different demographic differences in how COVID-19 impacted people. So we looked at, how did COVID-19 impact low-income people, college students, people that live on reservations, people that live in rural areas. We were really trying to uplift the voices and the experiences that had been largely omitted in the past year in the COVID-19 coverage in the media. And also a part of the Indigenous Futures Project, we collected information on political and civic engagement prior to the 2020 election. And so some things that we were interested in looking at was, who votes? Are the youth voting? Are elders voting? If they're not voting, why aren't they voting? Do we trust our government? If we don't trust our government, what are the reasons why we don't trust our government? And one of the sections that I wanted to highlight was a section on Indigenous voters in battleground states. And so in this section of the report, we were able to unpack, what are the priorities of Indigenous people in battleground states? Are they focused on healthcare? Are they worried about violence against their women and children? Do they need, food access is an issue? And so I think this section was particularly important because we did see in the past election, Native people made a huge impact on the election results, especially in swing states such as Arizona. And so these are just a few of the projects that I've had the opportunity to work on. There's many more. I have projects on red face and blackface, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You know, just there's a lot of different areas that I've had an opportunity to work in. So I'm really happy to talk to any youth that is interested in any of these areas or is just interested in college in general, because I really think that's, you know, being a first gen, being the first one to go through that. I don't want other people to go through that. Um, but when I think about, you know, how am I going to use all of this experience that I've gathered in the past 4 years to help my community? The next social issue that I'm starting to think about is climate change. And I think a lot of us are thinking about that and how Indigenous people actually, like, we have a lot of the answers and knowledge on how to take care of Mother Earth. So, one prime example of this is the increase in wildfires in California, and that being a direct result of colonization, of displacing us from our land, of the lack of land stewardship. And California actually outlawed seasonal burnings in the 1900s. So it's a direct result of us being taken from our land. And we actually have the cultural knowledge, the deep ecological knowledge, but why isn't it being used at the rates that it should be? So as a social psychologist, I'm really trying to understand at the psychological level, how do people think about Indigenous science? Do they see it as valuable as Western science? Do they think that we have the right tools that we need? Or if they don't think about us as valuable as Western science, what is contributing to that? Are there, you know, are stereotypes about our land management skills being ancient and not being able to use in the modern times? You know, how can we really shift how people are thinking about Indigenous science? And so that's kind of where I hope my research can start, the direction I hope it can start going into. But yeah, I'm super excited to hear what questions you all have. And thank you for having me. So I think up next we have Dominic. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dominic Lopez-Toney. I guess to just give you an overview of my history, I studied undergrad at UC Berkeley. Prior to that, I actually went to community college, which I think a lot of people don't know about some of the resources that you do have at that point. While I was there, I was fortunate enough to join a little science STEM program. And through some of my contacts there, I actually was able to get a internship at Stanford University in their molecular biology program. And through that, actually, I was able to present on my research. We were looking at like really nerdy science stuff with like particular proteins that are involved in cell signaling, transduction, and whatnot. But the implications were future therapies like cancer, cardiovascular disease. So it was a pretty important project. And through that, you know, I was able to kind of keep moving my academic career forward, and that probably helped a lot with me getting into Berkeley. And while I was there, I joined this biology scholars program, which was kind of the only thing that kind of kept me sane, because at least when I transferred to Berkeley, I noticed that I was in a foreign space. I knew nobody really looked like me, especially in my classes. Nobody looked like me. There were a couple times that people asked if like what position I played, or like if I was on this team or that team, and that got old pretty quick. But I kind of did feel lost for a little bit there, and my academics kind of suffered because of that. And that was until I was able to kind of find a community in this program. and just find like-minded people with similar interests, and just that support group. I think most of all to let me know that I wasn't there by myself, um, and that I guess kind of saved me. And now currently, I am about to start my third year of medical school. I'm about to start my clinical year. Currently studying for Sub 1, which I mean is not the most fun, but conversation for a later day. But to go back to what I was speaking on earlier, that support group is something that I think is really vital to fostering a environment that allows someone to be successful in whatever field that they want to go into, even in any field. So that's something that I've always been really passionate about, trying to foster and set up for other youths, especially minority youths. So while I was in community college, I worked at or I volunteered with an after-school program in East Palo Alto, where we took fifth and sixth graders and tried to get them interested in the sciences. And if you didn't know, East Palo Alto is a pretty neglected community historically, a lot of poverty and crime. So to give those kids a glimpse of a different path to go to, and to make them think that like school is fun and cool, and the things that you can do in the sciences, I think is really important to try to develop at that age. And that was a really huge growing opportunity for myself. And after I transferred, I tried to keep that going. And at Berkeley, I was involved with the Homies program, which takes high schoolers in the Mission District who are kind of at risk for, or who have like a semi-troubled past, and try to get them back in line. And again, it was more of a science-oriented program, but through that, we were actually able to get a couple of the students into some UC programs and state schools who otherwise they said themselves that they never really considered going to college. And I think one of them actually just graduated in computer engineering. So and seems to be doing really well. I think he has a couple of jobs already lined up. So to go, sorry, I'm totally losing where I'm at right now. But yeah, so support. So that's something that we've also been doing with this youth committee, is trying to really come together and create an environment to support our fellow youths, which is something I've been extremely proud to be a part of. And something that I definitely plan to keep moving forward at whatever capacity I can. So I guess what got me interested in medicine in particular is kind of just looking at all the different intricate beauties that the creator has brought together that allows us to breathe, allows us to move. It's really beautiful if you look at it, just the way that everything flows. So that really gave me interest in science at an early age. And then growing up, you kind of just see a lot of the disparities within health. And like, I don't know if many of you are aware, but Native Americans actually have the lowest life expectancy of any ethnic group. In the United States, I think it's 5.5 years less than all other ethnic groups. And we also kind of are at the top of the charts when it comes to issues like hypertension, chronic liver disease, abuse and addiction. And respiratory illnesses as well. So so I guess like that kind of was something that showed me that this is something that is a real big problem, and how can I use where I've gone to try to address that. So obviously, like me trying to go into medicine and becoming a doctor, yeah, obviously I can treat patients, but on the side of that, also just advocating for public health awareness and trying to join different programs that really try to get people to just live a healthier lifestyle, and know that whatever like pointers or tips that they need, that they have somewhere to go, or any questions that they have, that they have somebody to ask them to. So that is definitely something that I plan to do for the rest of my life. And my hope is one day I'll be able to do a little bit more hands-on research too, with some traditional medicines to kind of keep that traditional knowledge within the tribe. Um, so I think, yeah, I think with that, I'll go ahead and pass it on to the next speaker, Stephen. And if anybody in here is interested in medicine or sciences, by all means, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Dominic. Mishmin Truhis, Kanarkat Stephen. That means my name is Stephen. And today I'm going to talk about kind of my path and how I got involved in our tribe. And it all starts when I graduated high school. And I went to college, age 18, right? That's what a lot of people do. And I was like, okay, let's go. I went to college. 2 weeks into it, I'm like, yeah, this is great. And then I skipped my first class. And I ended up skipping a lot more classes. And I flunked out of college my first year. And I ended up dropping out of school for 3 years. It's like, what? What the heck? Why would you start with this, dude? Well, anyways, I went on this path. I was looking around like, I don't think that this is for me. I don't like school. This is pointless. I didn't feel like there was a connection for me. And so that's kind of what I went out looking for, was a connection. It's like, okay, like what do I connect with personally? And so I went out looking for that. And that question brought me to going and working on a farm in Hawaii. And that was kind of my first taste of kind of connecting with native culture. And the thing was, I wasn't even working on a farm with native Hawaiians, but what I was working on was with a farm that was revitalizing native foods and creating like this ecosystem of native foods. So I was getting this introduction of like understanding, whoa, like there's something going on here. There's an ecosystem. I didn't really understand it at the time, right? I was pretty young. I still am. But anyways, so that was kind of my first initial taste to understanding like there's native cultures, and there's native cultures to take care of the land, and then taking care of the land will help take care of them. It's like, okay, wow, okay, gotcha. And to also like step back a moment, it's like I always knew that I was native growing up, but I didn't really have a connection with the tribe. I was very much an outsider. And so part of that hunt, the search of finding purpose, was also looking for that connection with the tribe as well. And so I left Hawaii, came back, and I went and worked on this farm, or this property, doing just land work and kind of like getting my feet in the ground and learning how to use saws and clearing and burning and doing all these things. And at the time, I just understood it as, okay, we're just taking care of the forest. But what I didn't realize at the time is that we were essentially maintaining an area that had been overgrown. And I didn't understand this at the time. I didn't understand the vocabulary to explain this. All I understood was, okay, we're taking care of this area. It's unhealthy. It's not taken care of. So what happens next is I find my way to the tribe. I find my connection. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to connect. I want to meet the tribe. And so I ended up meeting Val on top of Mount Eminem. And we met a couple other times after that. I told him, I was like, Val, I kind of have a tough time. I want to find my purpose in life. Like, that's just what I'm looking for. And he's like, well, I recommend coming to work for the Land Trust. You'll find it there. And it's like, okay, sure. I didn't think much of it. And sure enough, joining their Land Trust changed my entire life. And it helped bring an understanding to what I was already working towards. And that was revitalizing natural habitats to kind of a traditional sense of pretty much bringing back native species and finding homeostasis, some equilibrium, and just essentially health to the land. That's what I was like already working towards. And finding the Land Trust kind of brought me to that point of giving me the vocabulary to explain this is stewardship. This is something that our people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years to keep our environment healthy. And so learning all this is like, whoa, this is so cool. This is what I enjoy. This is really awesome. And so I ended up going back to school. So this mix started happening where I was now part of the Land Trust and going to school. So keep in mind, I'm an undergrad, so I'm going to Cabrillo College right now, currently, and so essentially I've taken what I'm doing with the Land Trust and I started like supplementing classes to kind of fit this I can't think of the word. Pretty much I was finding ways to supplement what I was learning and experiencing through work and to learn more on it so I can elaborate on what I'm doing, kind of dive deeper into the purpose of the work we're doing. And so Val came to me and he brought up, he's like, hey, we're looking to get involved in the ocean. And we want to find like our position working with the ocean. It's like, okay, sure. So I looked at my list of classes and also keep in mind, at the time I was enrolled to be a psychology major, like Julisa here. And I was really like, oh, I want to be a counselor. This is like what I want to do totally. So this was my schedule. I took public speaking, psychology, and marine biology. The moment I went to marine biology, I was like, I'm done with psychology. Like this is where it's at. And so that class totally changed me. And if it wasn't for Val, I wouldn't have been pushed to take that class. And so I took it and I kind of developed this really strong connection, which I was already having with the ocean, but it kind of like further is like, whoa, this is incredible. And so essentially, long story short, finding my way to learning about the ocean makes it to where it's like, now this is really what I want to study. But on top of that, I'm studying environmental science because I think environmental science, it really incorporates everything that we do with our Land Trust. It helps give us an understanding of why we're doing it, because environmental science essentially ties in ecology and seeing how everything's connected. And in a way, that's what we're doing, is we're connecting to our landscape. Well, this is the kicker here that I feel like is not really addressed in our learning is this difference between human beings and the natural world, inside, outside. But that's just a made up barrier. We're a part of the ecosystem. We are a piece of the ecosystem. We're not an outsider. Like that is just a made up concept. So when we allow ourselves to see that, we kind of see, whoa, we have a role here. Like we have a position in our environment. This is us, and we are a product of our environment as much as our product is environment of us. So that kind of falls into the start of our Land Trust and how Val was told by the tribal elders, we need to readopt our position, or not readopt, we need to pretty much bring back our position as stewards of the earth, because that responsibility has never left us. It's always been there. And so that kind of falls back into what I'm studying is environmental science and marine sciences, because as much as we're connected with the land, we're connected with the ocean. And so those both interact. And if we actively work to understand those environments, it helps us to understand how we can play a role and help incorporate into those environments. So essentially what my position is I'm a steward of the land trust. So I work in the field and I do the hard labor and work on these projects we do. And I'm not going to get into the projects. I think I'm running low on like the past few minutes. But anyways, what I'd like to see go forward, and this is kind of a shared vision along many people in our land trust, is I'd like to see our land trust in all of our tribe learning about these environments, learning how these environments work, so we can see our place in there, and also to develop projects to help incorporate our influence to help heal these environments, because our oceans and our lands are severely ill. They're not doing well. And there's multiple factors why. And the main driving factor is humanity. We've just become massive consumers, and we take, and we try to take as much space as possible without giving anything back. And so the biggest thing that we can do as land trust, and what I'd like to see happen, is that involvement of making our way through the environment we're in, understanding it, and finding our place in it. That's pretty much what I got for now. So anyways, appreciate your time, and I'm going to pass it off to Carolyn.
Mishmin Terhis, Conricat Carolyn Rodriguez. Hi, everyone. This is Carolyn. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I am going to share my screen. Give me just one moment. So currently I'm at UCLA, and I am a first-year PhD student in education, social research methodology. But before I kind of get to what I want to do with that, I just kind of want to give like a brief overview of of my journey. And so I thank you, Stephen, for your story, because I will say that I had a similar experience because I started off in community college, and there were some classes that I had to retake because I did skip too. And so for me, it was a learning moment, and it was also a moment where I was maturing and figuring out, what am I interested in academics. So when it came time to transfer, I decided that I wanted to go to UC Santa Cruz. And for me, it was really about, I want to go to a campus that sits on the land of my ancestors. And because at the time I felt like a disconnect. I felt like I was looking for, how can I connect to my Native identity? And so during my time at UC Santa Cruz, I also interned for the American Indian Resource Center. I was out there from like 2010 to 2012, and I was also on the speaker series board as a student leader. But also once I graduated, I kind of forgot about this, but for an interim position, I worked at the Ethnic Resource Center as a program coordinator. So I did help with event planning, and that's basically also when I really found my interest for just working in student affairs. And so I secured a position at UC Santa Cruz, the Educational Opportunity Programs Office. I was the EOP specialist for almost 5 years, and I did a lot of work with student programming, event planning, offering and providing student resources, but also managing the office and managing financials and all the behind the scenes that kept the EOP office going. I also supervised interns, and I got to work with interns, with student interns. So I had a lot of experience working with diverse communities. And that was when I really figured out that I wanted the space to just narrow in on Native American students. And I got really interested in student retention. And so that was when I decided that I wanted to go to UCLA and get my master's in American Indian Studies. So this is my thesis that I did finish, and I got approved this past fall, 2021. But before I hit on that, I do want to say that my time at UCLA, I've got really active with AIGSA, so the American Indian Graduate Student Association. And so for me, it was about connecting with my community. I was looking for a community and try to seek out other Indigenous students that I could just build community with, learn with, but also, focusing on our retention and then even our educational experiences, since We make up 1% of the student population, even and as undergrads, but it even gets less when you move up the ranks and when you're an graduate student. So there is a lot of invisibility of Indigenous students on campus in general. But for me at UCLA, being a part of AIGSA, when I was a master's student, my second year, that's when I served as a finance director. So I was still able to do all the work that I enjoyed doing at EOP. And then this year, I'm serving as the AIGSA co-chair. So a lot more work, a lot more creating visibility on campus. And I will say a highlight for us is working with the team, me working with my other AIGSA team board, because one of our accomplishments was that we did create more of more visibility with us on UCLA, because now we are considered a special interest group. And so now we have more of a voice on Graduate Student Association in general. And so I'm excited for the years to come and to see what the next board can do for that. So I'm sharing this because I wanted everybody to know that for me, finding my success, it is a part of connecting with other Indigenous students and focusing on our educational experiences. But when it comes to my work and when it comes to my thesis, that's when I really wanted to focus on California natives, because I felt, in Native, and I would say that in Native studies in general, a lot of the focus it is on Indigenous tribes that have federal recognition and have, I would say, strong connections to their culture. And so for me, it was I want to highlight the California Native voice. And so I went forward with rewriting California Native American representations, and also Amah Mutsun tribal sovereignty and educational experiences of tribal elders. So I think I may have skipped over the part that when I was at UC Santa Cruz, I graduated in literature. So for me, I'm all about literature. Reading more work from Native American Indigenous writers. And so for me, it was okay, I have this passion with literature since an undergrad. And now with my work, I'm extremely, want to do stuff with supporting California Native college students and grad students, that my thesis, I really tied it all together and I really tried to interweave things. And so, okay. And so this is what basically my thesis is and what I looked at. The main thing is I first started looking at misrepresentations of California Native Americans and dehumanizing stereotypes in American literature. So looking at European scholars and the way they were writing about Indigenous people at the development of the United States government. During settler colonialism, when everyone is coming over and laws are being established, land was being stolen and genocide was happening. And so I found that a lot from readings and from writing American settler authors, they really basically deemed California Native, I would say, being general right now for all Native Americans, they really did look at how they were civilized and how Native people were uncivilized and how they were the savage. And so I argue that, they're looking at basically calling Native Americans savages because that's how they identify us as the other. And so that way they don't have to respect our land, our culture, respect our rights to our land, or, respect our livelihoods, our lives. And so I looked at that, but then I also was okay, how can I narrow in on the California Native perspective? And so that's when I did start looking at media, which specifically newspapers. And I found that, in and I'm blanking on the year right now, but when California became a state, okay, and when American settlers were coming over here, there was publishing in newspapers where basically, using that California natives are savages, they're the devils, they're lazy, they have no rights, they can't own land, they deemed us as, you guys, you all can't own land and you all are savages. And basically that's how they dehumanized us, to basically make them, I would say, for lack of better words, but, make them feel better about what they were doing, right? It's kind of like, if we're going to steal land, you kind of have to make the other side look bad, so that way you could feel good about what you're doing. And so I definitely looked at that. But then I also was like, okay, how can I combat this? How can I change this? And so I did look at uplifting California Native voices, trying to do that through Indigenous literature, oral history, and storytelling. And so for example, I read Deborah Miranda, her work with on California missions. And so I examined her poetry to basically try to say how Native authors are writing from the perspective of Indigenous people, California natives, to basically tell our story, but to also represent us in humanizing ways, in respectful ways. And from there, I tie that into Amah Mutsun, our tribal band history, and our rights for upholding sovereignty. Because I think it was mentioned already from my cousins that we're not federally recognized. And so, but that doesn't mean anything. We're basically still a nation. We're still a tribe. We're still going to uphold our sovereignty. And because of that, we are rewriting history. We are telling history. And I will say, I forgot to mention this, I put "re" in parentheses as a way of, we're not just writing history, we're claiming history. We're telling history from our perspective. And so that's why I put rewriting "re" in parentheses. And I also, that is a method that I borrowed from Dr. Kutcha Baldi Reisling. And so from there, that's when it's like, okay, within our sovereignty and within these misrepresentations, how do these representations impact the community? And so I specifically wanted to learn more about elders in my community and about their experiences. And so I wondered, how do these misrepresentations impact their educational experiences? What stereotypes or biased ideals did they have to overcome, or they impact through their lives, through grade school, and even maybe in college? And then lastly, I'll say with this thesis and with my work overall, I use oral history to combine Indigenous knowledge systems and education research, where oral history serves to prioritize the voices of participants. So using oral history as, theory, as knowledge that we could use for the future or create change, or, just basically. Also, oral history connects us with our ancestors. So for me, it's a meaningful experience that allows me to connect with my tribal communities, but also my ancestors, our ancestors. I have 2 more slides, but basically, these are kind of just more details of what I learned about the elders. And so, during their time, they did grow up in poverty, and there were instances where they faced discrimination in the classroom, whether it was the teacher or even fellow classmates and also I want to say that at this time, the elders, they did express that they had more of a Mexican identity, because they were still connecting to Amah Mutsun ancestors and learning the Amah Mutsun identity. So elders, they're still everyone in the tribe, a lot of us, we're still learning our identity, even as adults or even as elders. And so when I say that they face discrimination in school, it was more discrimination, on stereotypes that impacted Mexican people. But at the same time, I didn't have the capacity or the time to dive more deeper into that and to analyze that more. So that is something that I probably could look at in the future. But yeah, so definitely how the lack of support that they received in grade school, and how that impacted their life after high school, whether they went to college or if they didn't go to college. For those that did go to college, some of them struggled with balancing academics and full-time employment and personal struggles. But also at the same time, a lot of the elders, they know how colonialism impacts their life. And they know that, learning their culture now, it's important, and especially when thinking about the future of basically, the elders, and I would say myself and a lot of my young adult cousins here, that we are dreaming of a future where youth will have a strong Amah Mutsun identity, where they will have that connection, and they don't necessarily have to go searching for it in the ways that, I have or my other cousins have. And so lastly, I just want to end with a quote from the data. And so this is also why I'm doing what I'm doing. But basically, I'm just going to read this. Excuse me. So the Western world is successful, and we could be successful with it, but long as we know who we are. Because if you don't know where you come from, if you don't know who you are, I feel you're always going to be lost, because you're in a world that wasn't meant to be. We weren't meant to be in a Western world. We were meant to be in our own native lands, in our own culture, and everything else, but it's just the way things happened. We have to be stronger being a minority, being Amah Mutsun. We have to be stronger and learn as much as knowledge to be one step ahead. Like I said, the law was created not to benefit us. I think the law was to benefit colonialism, but we can learn the law because the books are there for anybody to read and learn and succeed. Anybody could be successful with an education or without an education. And so with my, I'm stop sharing, but basically with my research and with my PhD, that's kind of that's basically what I want to do is, supporting tribal cousins, youth that want to go to college and making sure that they get, they have support with making those decisions and making sure that, if they're applying to follow fellowships, scholarships, but also supporting the students that don't want to go to college, that aren't interested in receiving an education, and how can we make sure that they're successful in their own lives. So that's basically what I want to do. And I do have a lot big dreams and a lot of ideas of how we could get there. But yeah, I think this is the beginning of it. And so thank you for listening. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Alexii.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and for all the other people that I get to follow. Thank you all. Can everyone see this slide? Okay, perfect. Well, hello, everyone. Mishmin Trujis. My name is Alexii Sigona, also a tribal member and a part of the Amah Mutsun youth group. And we define youth as around 30 or below. So we're kind of, loose with that, and we're all youth for a little while. And it'll be quite some time before we all become elders, if that happens in the future too. So yeah, like all of my other youth members here and cousins, I'll be talking a little bit about my academic journey, a couple of research projects, and a conclusion. There's not much time here, and there's so many wonderful things to share. So I'll be glancing over a few things with some amazing photos of Mutsun and Awaswas territory for you all to enjoy as well. And this one here is at Rocks Ranch in San Benito County, next to Amah Irek. So to start, in undergrad, going back several years, I went to the University of San Francisco here in the Bay Area, and I actually learned about being Amah Mutsun while at USF. I didn't really know much about it, and like many of us, I called on an elder, Chairman Lopez, and was really interested in how my degree in environmental studies could perhaps merge with the Amah Mutsun. And I really didn't know anything about the Amah Mutsun Land Trust and the Native Stewardship Corps before that, but that was a really a perfect plug-in for me to really get involved and learn about the Stewardship Corps. And so it felt like it was a perfect complement to my university education because, it's one thing to learn about an ecosystem reading a book, and it's another thing to be out there with the native stewards, healing the land, healing ourselves. And I think that really informed my research interest too, of understanding that it was a really important work that the Amah Mutsun Stewardship Corps is doing with the land trust, and that also that Indigenous issues are deserving of academic research. I think coming into that, I didn't think this, these issues around Amah Mutsun stewardship and land rights fit within the university, canon. And so really realizing that there was potential for that was really helpful. And it made me feel like my research interests belong and that I belong too in this system if I choose to, be a part of it. And, moving into graduate school, so now I'm a second year PhD student in environmental science, policy, and management. in the Society and Environment Division at UC Berkeley. So kind of a bit of a mouthful, but let's say, environmental social sciences is kind of what I study. And I chose UC Berkeley because of the competitive funding, strong interdisciplinary focus within my department, the advisor fit, and then proximity to Amah Mutsun homelands. And, for those of you who may not know, a PhD program kind of provides opportunities to engage in multi-year projects where maybe, something like a 1-year or 2-year master's degree program is really great, but you can't maybe get as much in depth in it. And there's also, limited funding in master's programs. And I had no idea what a PhD was going into, university. And I also didn't know that you can go to a PhD program straight from undergrad. I thought you needed to have several degrees before that. So that was, all a journey for me and a learning process. And I was really supported by my university advisors and also by, Amah Mutsun community members as well in this journey. So my emerging research interests are really around, Native American environmental governance, indigenous property rights, and more broadly, Native American studies, political ecology, and indigenous environmental studies is what I'm looking at. Very similar to what other folks have shared before me. And here's a photo of an Amah Mutsun Land Trust steward at a pile burn in Kidoste Valley Cultural Preserve in March. So yeah, let's move into the research. So as a second-year student, I haven't really been able to do a ton of research, but I've been, initiating some projects that I'd love to share with you. And so one of these is a collaboration with another PhD candidate, and she's a second year in ESPM, my department, Annie Taylor. And we're researching the impacts of Amah Mutsun stewardship on the landscape and also within the community. So Annie provides, the ecological sciences perspective from a remote sensing expertise, and then I'm doing a bit more of the social science perspectives. But we learn from each other, and we really try to, look at the same thing through different lenses. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I encourage all of you to, look into interdisciplinary projects or opportunities if you can. And one component of this project is, interviewing community members and kind of just assessing the needs and the interests of the community. As a first and second year student, I know that I don't have all the answers, and it's really important to listen, And so I just wanted to highlight some of the names of folks who have been able to participate in this and really inform and guide us. Without the support of the Amah Mutsun community, my research, Annie's research, wouldn't be possible. So it's really, the voices of these folks here that we're able to really build off of and uplift as well. Another component besides the interview project is doing some vegetation mapping. And so here we're doing a drone mapping project at Kidoste Valley Cultural Preserve, where the Amah Mutsun Stewardship Corps steward their land. And so, that's just one example of, how research can maybe help inform Amah Mutsun stewardship with the land trust and kind of be used to help. It's not just about us having academic publications and stuff like that, right? It's really about making sure that we can support the needs and interests of the community, like I said. And going on to another project, I wanted to share this project that Carolyn and I are actually working on with UC Santa Cruz, and it's a 4th grade mission curriculum project with Dr. Renya Ramirez and Dr. Judith Scott. And Carolyn and I are tasked with doing an oral history interview project with community members. And so here's a photo taken a few months ago with Michael Higuera and Trina Higuera Coates at Mission San Juan Batista. And so these interviews are going to help inform 4th grade mission curriculum. And also these recordings are going to be housed in a tribal repository, which will be shared within the community for intergenerational knowledge sharing. So it's just wonderful that folks like Trina and Michael are able to, share their knowledge and perspectives with us. And, there's other folks here that I'm listing that also have been really influential in this project as well. And their voices are centered and are super important to making sure that, the next generation of folks in California are really going to learn about a more accurate representation of what happened in the California mission period from the voices of community members themselves. And a couple other research projects I wanted to highlight. And here you can see an aerial photo from Uristock, which is one of our sacred sites near Gilroy. And it's overlooking the San Felipe Sink and the Diablo Range. So if you're ever on Highway 101, just south of Gilroy, you can see these rolling hills. And that is, the heart of our ancestral territory. But anyway, I am involved in a human rights center project at UC Berkeley, and we're looking at international policy, specifically the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and how maybe we can use that to apply it to Amah Mutsun context for, getting local resolutions of support, maybe through some of our memorandum of understanding or conservation easements and stuff like that. So really thinking about ways to go around and circumvent a lack of federal recognition. And that could mean, using international frameworks, which are pretty progressive, to further the rights of Amah Mutsun people. And I also want to highlight that although, this is around indigenous rights, it's also just helping enact or support the responsibilities that community members have. So, the tribe isn't, all about just getting rights to get rights. It's about rights to make sure that we can enact our responsibility, our cultural obligations to tend to the land. And another project I've been involved with for the past several years is with my undergraduate advisor, Dr. Adrian Johnson. And we're trying to better understand Amah Mutsun Land Trust's co-management initiatives, really looking at this, the power structures in there and maybe how other California Native communities or other indigenous peoples can learn from Amah Mutsun Land Trust experiences with engaging with, natural resource agencies such as national parks, BLM, or state parks, who have been really key contributors to the work of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust as well. And, I want to bring it back to the broader impacts, right? So, I'm a second-year university student, and I have to take all these classes, and, I need to write all these papers and stuff. But, we also need to think about, okay, I have this opportunity to give back a lot of my time and other ways of support to the community. And so, what are ways that I can be accountable to making sure that my work is supporting the community? So one thing, of course, is these preliminary interviews are coming in with a question of how can I help? Instead of here's something that I want to do and I think is going to help. It's coming from a different way of listening, right, and understanding, and also acknowledging that there is so much knowledge in our community already, and helping to inform the Amah Mutsun Land Trust stewardship initiatives through things such as vegetation mapping, and to really understand and help show the impacts of Indigenous stewardship that Stephen and other folks in the Land Trust are enacting. And then, like I mentioned before, these interview recordings, which will be donated to a tribal repository. These are tens of hours of interview footage that is, shot and recorded on nice cameras with good audio, so that our future generations can learn this knowledge that folks have been willing to share with myself and other researchers, and it's just really beautiful. And also, thinking beyond just the Amah Mutsun, right, our community, other Indigenous communities may be able to learn from our experiences in stewardship and co-management. And so maybe folks like myself and others can really help inform them, so that we can honor the stewardship and the TEK, as Julisa mentioned, of local Indigenous peoples, right? Because there are so many Indigenous peoples, even in the state of California, even in the Bay Area, that are deserving of representation within the field of environmental management. And I just wanted to, for the conclusion, what was really helpful for me is that issues facing Indigenous peoples are deserving of academic scholarship. I didn't think that going into university, but I learned that in my formative years. And that just helps with feelings of belonging, that our knowledge systems and our bodies can belong here and fit here. And it's important for universities as well. And Indigenous scholars are uniquely suited for community-based research with tribal communities. And in the future, I hope to continue supporting the needs and interests of the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band and Land Trust beyond graduate school. And so something, that this isn't going to be, 2 more years until I get my degree and then off I go, as Chairman Lopez mentioned at the beginning. there needs to be, a form of commitment and also a dedication to uplifting and serving the needs of the community. Because without the Amah Mutsun community and the fantastic work that elders have done before me in our generation, then I wouldn't be able to do this work right here. And finally, just acknowledgements. Many collaborators here, including community members, like I mentioned, that were participating in the research, some funding, and my advisors both inside and outside academia, and all photos were my own. So I think that'll wrap up our presentations here. So I'll stop sharing my screen and maybe we can go to Q&A. Thank you so much.
Wow. Just amazing, just amazing. I knew you guys were smart, but I didn't know you were that smart. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You make the tribe so proud. You all do. Well, we're supposed to end at 2:30, and right now it's 2:28. We're going to go over a little bit. I know that the Amah Mutsun Land Trust is controlling the Zoom, so they won't kick us off. And so we're going to take advantage of that benefit for us. We do have some questions, but we are going to ask you to keep your questions short because we don't want to go over by too much. Okay? So let me get started with the Q&A. And thank you thank those who are attending. We're really happy to have you here. And to help us find ways to move forward together. The first question that came in was for Athena, and it was from Mr. Raymond Hitchcock, who's also the executive director of our land trust. He's he's new to the land trust, but he's our new executive director. So I'm happy to thank you for submitting this question, Raymond. Athena, have you considered becoming a tribal attorney, providing needed legal representation and assistance to Native communities? It could be tribal general counsel, working with environments, cultural, tribal court, federal recognition, etc. That's for you, Athena, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Raymond. And yeah, I think ever since Val learned of my desire to go to law school and practice law as an attorney thereafter, we've had an ongoing conversation actually about becoming general counsel for our tribe. And so I think if I did go that route, just because I have known of, I've been privy to the amount of, legal research that our tribe is constantly requiring, and the legal research that is just inherently entailed in a lot of our goals as a tribe, I would probably really prioritize becoming general counsel for the tribe versus going into a practice for various tribes and just sort of Indian law in general, because I do think that would serve my purpose best. I think that from the beginning, I've, kind of articulated the need for myself to get my bearings in the legal field as a start, just to get practical experience under my belt, learn from other attorneys, another supervisor, things like that, before I'm able to take on that role, to assume that role. And of course, that role is, an honor. But in assuming that role, I do, I don't take the responsibility lightly. And I do want to step into that having confidence in my ability to research and write and know the law and, be able to navigate it in that way if I do step into that leadership role for my tribe. So I think the best way to do that, to prepare myself, is to start, in other established organizations, just to get my bearings and learn from other attorneys and really hone my skills, research and writing and otherwise, before I do that. And something I didn't mention during my portion of the speech was that I accepted offer of employment with the California Supreme Court. So I'll be starting at the California Supreme Court in September, working for the Criminal Central staff. And so that is reviewing appeals brought by criminal defendants that are basically saying, my conviction should be overturned. The lower court, got this wrong. And so I think that the California Supreme Court, and I have extra in there, I think that they'll be able to really, contribute to my just evolution as an attorney. I think I'll build a really great foundation from there with some of the best attorneys in the state, if not the nation. And I hope to, my goal is to one day be able to take that and step into that, incredible role with the tribe if I could be so fortunate at that stage. And I do want to say that I think that, law outside of working for the tribe still impacts the, Indigenous community. We're a very small percentage of the legal profession. And, like I mentioned earlier, criminal law adversely and disproportionately affects the Indigenous community. And so I think that having that Indigenous lens, having those roots, having that cultural identity really is important when it comes to decision makers, when it comes to state organizations such as the California Supreme Court. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena, and thank you for the question. I was reminded that the event goes till 3:00, so we're still doing okay. And for those of you who are on or with us here, we would like you to fill out a questionnaire before you leave. That's important for the American Indian Resource Center to be able to evaluate how effective the programs are going and how well they're being received. The evaluation form is, you'll see that the link in the chat. So if you can fill that out before you leave, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Our next question is directed to Julisa, our second speaker. And let me find it. Julisa, did you feel supported at UC Santa Cruz and the University of Michigan? I learned through the American Indian College Fund that Native Americans in college can feel very lonely, leading to dropping out of school. I hope your experiences have been positive.
Thanks for that question. I've been very fortunate to have a different experience. I've, since my freshman year, Val made sure that I was introduced to the American Indian Resource Center, and I really had that community to lean on. At the time when I was at Santa Cruz, Carolyn was also working at the EOP, so I knew I had people looking out for me, and I knew I had a community to fall back on. And then now that I've been fortunate enough that all of my mentors in my undergrad and now going to grad school have been women of color, specifically Native and Latina women, which are my identities. So I've just been so fortunate to get that mentorship and continued support. But that definitely is a real experience throughout. Most of the time for Native youth, they can go their entire academic career without a Native peer or a teacher. So that does have some psychological impacts as far as what they see is possible for themselves in the future. So I've just been fortunate enough to have a really, really great support system throughout my journey. And I attribute a lot of my success to my support system as well.
Dominic, let me ask you the same question because you're in medical school and you did say that in a lot of your classes, you're the only one like you there. So let me ask you, Dominic, did you feel supported in your education? And this person mentioned that they learned that that college can feel very lonely and leading to people dropping out of school. How was your experience, Dominic?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a very lonely experience, I suppose. Especially initially when I got to Berkeley, because really it was just a foreign place for me. But I think both at the community college level and at the UC level, I was fortunate enough to find like some programs for the sciences. At the community college program, it was just a STEM center, which is like where they had like tutoring, and I actually worked as a tutor there. So I was kind of able to create a community of people who I would study with, and we would become friends, and that just helped me to stay focused while I was prior to transferring. And then at Berkeley, I think it was it was the second semester after I transferred in. I came across this biology scholars program, which is where I met some of my closest friends there, who I still keep in contact with. And I think if it weren't for me coming across those places, it would have been a much more challenging path to endure. But I think I mean, I feel like it also depends on where you are. I know Berkeley especially was a really hostile environment. So outside of the program, it was just really hard to just interact naturally and meet new people who are willing to kind of bring you into their circle, especially as a transfer student. But I think that at every institution, they are going to have their different programs and centers where I think one would be able to go in and try to create a community there. And I think that really helped me and also helps a lot of other students.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you. And you had a close group of student friends there in medical school, and then COVID hit and everybody had to go home, huh? You guys still stay in touch and stuff?
Yeah, no, we definitely stay in touch. Some of those, I mean, medical school, everyone's studying 24/7. So, and your group is pretty close knit. So I think I'll keep in touch with them probably for the rest of my life.
Okay, thank you, Dominic. There were two questions here for Stephen that I'm going to combine. Stephen, if you didn't leave college, do you think your life would be drastically changed? That's the first question. And the second question is, what do you see as the most significant area of research and change needed for marine protection and restoration?
Yeah, thank you, Val, and thank you for those who asked the questions. I think absolutely my life would be drastically different. And, there's times I think about it as like, what would it be like if I didn't drop out? Or what would it be like if I dropped out and didn't go back? There's so many possible ways. But I think if I wouldn't have dropped out, I would imagine myself like kind of fulfilling the position I wanted. But at the same time, I really wasn't happy. Like it wasn't what I wanted at the time. And so having that experience, it's not like I encourage people to drop out. It's not like something I'm saying, yeah, drop out of school. I know I kind of made light of it, but it's, it led me to like kind of have a tough time in many ways because I had to kind of recuperate. I had to even pay off my student loans. And so it was just like, just in that 1 year. So there's a lot of factors to overcome. But I'm grateful that I took the path I did. It taught me a lot. And if I would have had more guidance beforehand, I probably wouldn't have taken that path. So um, all worked out in the end. Or, I mean, it's still working out. Still working out the kinks. But anyways, to answer the other question, so to kind of like pick some general ideas of like marine protected areas and kind of like what that entails of stewardship. I mean, to me, it's kind of like thinking of like, you know, you can't pick your favorite kid sort of thing. There's, you know, like, there's so many factors to it that's like, we have to incorporate all into it, but it's more of just like, what's struggling the most. And there's two specific things that come to my mind. And like, one is specifically just water quality and monitoring. You know, the water has so many contaminants coming through it, as we all know. And so to kind of like incorporate our input and kind of observation within that water quality testing, I think would be really vital. And I think something that's really crucial that we have an opportunity to do that with is with Cabrillo College and the plankton monitoring program. Because through the plankton program, we're monitoring plankton species on top of that monitoring water quality and understanding how the currents and tides are affecting this time of year or this time of season, and kind of like really reading the land through a microscope, if you will. And so it's a really vital course that our stewards have been involved with. And of course, the other thing that I'd want to bring up is the kelp forests. I think the kelp forest is a very crucial environment to be working with, because the abundance of sea urchins that are destroying the kelp forests is catastrophic. And without the ecosystems of a kelp forest, we're going to see a lot of decline of biomass of different living species in the ocean that rely on those kelp forests. So those are two specific things I'd like to see kind of come more. But as I said, there's still plenty of other factors that we'd like to be involved with. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like this next question to be answered by both Carolyn and Alexii. In addition, oops, it just jumped pages. Let me find out where that question was. That was funny. The question was there and it just jumped. Well, the general question was, if I remember it correctly, and it was one that was asked by Sim Snyder, who is a professor on the university. I'm sorry, Sim, I lost your question, but I did read it.
Chairman,
I best remember it.
Chairman, to interrupt.
What changes? What am I doing here now? What changes can be made to improve on campus to improve? There you go. Somebody just said it again. A question for any panelists. In addition, and both this is for both Alexii and for Carolyn. A question for any panelist. In addition to transforming the academic fields in which you're engaged, what changes would you like to see around town? And that could be Santa Cruz or wherever, to building a sense of California Indian belonging. Carolyn, let's start with you, please.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a great question. And my mind immediately went to thinking of, California and thinking about our highways. And right now I'm thinking about mission bells that are, so I'm not sure if everybody knows like background on mission bells, but at the missions, there was bells that basically kept order things in order for California, the natives that were enslaved there, building building the missions. And at some point, because of tourism, it was decided that along the highways, Highway 101, there is mission bells posted along there to basically represent that was the roads that were taken for the mission system that they follow to develop the system. And so when you drive the highway today, you can see the bells every so many miles. And that is something that when we're talking about rewriting and we're talking about, honoring California Native people, removing, because those bells are a sign of genocide. They represent the genocide that happened at the mission bells. But then we take this symbol and we think mission bells represent this great myth of how things were for California Native people in the missions. So for me, I think that is something that I would like to see a change in, not just in Santa Cruz or in California, but just the bells that need to be removed on the highway. And I do want to give a shout out to Julisa right now and Val, because there was a mission bell at UC Santa Cruz that they worked with to get that removed. So I want to see more of that. And I think that does create more awareness for people that the mission system itself and all of the colonization that the Spaniards went through to develop the missions, it's not necessarily something that we should honor. We need to honor the California people instead, and how our ancestors survived that's here today. So that's.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And Alexei, can I ask you to answer the same question? If you'd like me to reread it, I can.
No, that is great. Thank you so much, Chairman. And I also agree with Carolyn about the mission era legacies. And that's one thing that that makes me have hope for the city of Santa Cruz and also local community members, to really push forward and to be an example of how we can accurately represent this history in California, at least. And, I mentioned in a written response to Sim's wonderful question that, moving away from a consultation-based approach to a consent-based framework where, Indigenous people's free, prior, and informed consent, regarding land use decisions is adopted instead of just, a 30-day consultation period, could be really, helpful. Having Indigenous peoples be able to say, no, we don't want you to mine our sacred land, for example, as opposed to just having consultation policies and consultation privileges, I should say. But I also want to turn folks' attention to the Gavin Newsom's Statement of Administration Policy on Native American and Ancestral Lands, which was released in September of 2020. And in this policy, and this was kind of regarding state-held lands, and so perhaps, county-held lands or municipal city of Santa Cruz lands are, not an exact fit. But one thing I wanted to highlight here towards the bottom, and I can send a link later, is that, Newsom says that when natural lands under the ownership or control of the state are in excess of state needs, working cooperatively within existing statutory and regulatory frameworks with California tribes that have ancestral territory within these lands and are interested in acquiring them, including by prioritizing tribal purchase or transfer of land, and also adopting preferential policies for California tribes to access natural lands, right? So let's think about that. So what would it look like, to give back ancestral lands to Indigenous peoples within the Santa Cruz region? Or what would it look like to really meaningfully provide access to our land, right? And so, going off of some social scientists who talk about access as the ability to benefit from things, access may not need just opening up a gate and letting people in. Access might need to acknowledge that it takes tribal members multiple gallons or, tons of gas to get out to these sites. It takes, a lot of resources to get out there. Many people work difficult jobs and may not be able to get out into these lands. And so really thinking about what would providing access to Amah Mutsun people or ancestral people of the Santa Cruz County area, what would that look like besides physically opening up a gate? And that could mean, supporting cultural knowledge systems, gathering practices, and so much more, and maybe gas prices too. So I'll end there, and I'll send a link to the statement by Newsom in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexei. Um, this is from Caitlin Kalelia. Thank you all for this wonderful discussion. I was struck by how many of you were able to get undergraduate research and internship experience. I've often found that undergraduates don't usually have access to to hands-on research experience. How did that access to research influence your path on higher education? Would anybody like to take that question?
I can jump in. Yeah, I think having access to research and internships makes a huge difference in how competitive you're considered as an applicant, especially when applying to graduate school. So I was actually able to find those types of opportunities and learn more about what research was through the American Indian Resource Center, and then also just looking out for opportunities through my own department. But I will say that it's definitely depends on like what institution you're at. So I was fortunate enough to attend a research institution where research was the main focus. But for people that are attending, state colleges or community colleges, that experience is going to be a lot different. But that's not to say those opportunities aren't out there. Like, for example, if you're at a community college, you might be able to reach out to a researcher at a four-year university and be like, hey, do you have any research opportunities for the summer? Do you need some extra help? Do you need a volunteer? And that's just one way to get your foot in the door. But there's plenty of research to be done. I guess it's just about finding the opportunities, which is the hardest part, is the access. But there are resources to help you. So I'm happy to talk to anyone too about like more in depth about my experience through research. I know, Carolyn, like you worked at the EOP, like you might know more, or like, working at different offices, there's different types of resources that students can get help with.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Julisa. I was thinking about a EOP program that I for interim. It was about 2 quarters where I supervised the Pathways to Research program. So it was like first generation EOP
I was in that program.
Yes, I remember. I remember you being there, being so excited because I was like, "Wow, we have a student researcher here from the same tribe as me, leading this group." So I do feel like for me, I didn't really do research as an undergrad because I was at a community college. But once I, got to UC Santa Cruz, learning about researchers and then becoming in a position where I, was helping young researchers find their way, like, well, through supervisional levels. Um, it really made me feel like, wow, like research is something that I want to do. Like I have my own research questions. I have my own explorations that I want to do. And I think the reason why I do it is because like there's more research that needs to be done, on California Indian people. But also when I'm doing research, I try to be very mindful of which methods I'm using and making sure that I'm doing research in a meaningful way that respects Indigenous people. Since, research for Native communities, there is a horrible past of people being researched and not being respected and us being dehumanized by researchers. So that's another thing that I do with research that I didn't really touch on with my thesis, but that's what we're going to be doing with my PhD with, identifying decolonial research methods that uplift Indigenous people and humanize us and respect us and honor us. So so I basically just want to say that research, as we engage in it, it is a colonial construct, but yet we're Indigenous people and we can use that tool to answer the research questions that we want to answer and to make sure that our research is meaningful to our communities. Since I argue that, a lot of colonial researchers, like that, they have that mentality of you just go do the research and then you benefit from the publications, you benefit with your tenure and your career. And that's not the focus. The focus is doing research for the community. And so that is something that you will hear about and read about when I work through my dissertation and all of that. So I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledge research and even how that has a colonial past.
Would anyone else like to speak on this topic?
Yeah, I could briefly hop in for a second. So actually, I was fortunate enough when I was in community college, I actually was able to do research, and it was a paid internship at Stanford, which really did open up a lot of doors for me and made me. That actually was kind of an early influencer in me wanting to move away from scientific research and thinking more about clinical practice. So I think that, and I did notice at the same time, a lot of my colleagues, at least at the community college I went to, Kenyatta College, they did a pretty good job of finding research opportunities for their students. So I'm sure, depending on, that's something that you could look into, I guess, when applying to whatever school that you're thinking about, is just seeing the access of research opportunities and student experiences. And if that isn't really available, something else that I think is really, really important in trying to increase your chances of getting into whatever school you want to get into is volunteer opportunities. Because not only does it look good, but it's just such a rewarding experience. And it gives you you can choose what you want to give your time to. And that also will help you to kind of solidify reaffirm your ideas of what you want to go into. And it's just a really huge opportunity for growth. So that's something that I really stress and put emphasis on students doing, is really looking at different ways that they could volunteer additionally.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexii. The next question is from Josue Garcia. And this is for Athena. With Indigenous violence continually increasing, have you ever considered or worked in addressing this epidemic?
Hi, Josue. Thank you for the question. And I do want to just kind of address, first of all, that I'm not sure if you are referring to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. That has definitely been an issue and is on the rise, if I'm not mistaken, in the last at least 5 years or so. But when we talk about violence, violence against Native Americans has been an epidemic since prior to this country's inception. So I do want to sort of redefine, how we think of violence. I think that's really important. And how we think of, systems of white supremacy, and they're constantly and continually inflicting violence on Native American communities. If we're talking about the epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women, in terms of addressing it and of, working to someday end that or improve conditions for Indigenous women such that they aren't subject to, disproportionately, violence and just abductions, and the erasure of, media and local and state authorities to just kind of disregard them such that they go missing for years. I do hope that one day, either in pro bono efforts, so completely volunteer, where I'm just volunteering my services and rendering them free of service or free of charge, either in that way or in some formal capacity where I am, working as a formal attorney on the matter. I do hope to, lend my time, skills, expertise to that cause specifically. But I will also say, and I think this is true, I don't want to speak for them, but I think this is true for all my cousins. Aside from my legal, sort of professional, formal self, I am an activist. And so that just comes in so many different forms. And so a lot of that entails, it looks different in every context. Whether I'm posting about it to social media, whether I'm educating and centering those issues that are specific to our Indigenous community in conversations with friends and family and whatnot, or whether I'm choosing to write about it in a legal class, which is actually what I chose to do. In my last year, we were tasked with writing about some issue where criminal justice could be reimagined, and I chose to center missing and murdered, the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And at the beginning of my presentation, I asked the class, who has heard of this epidemic? And less than a third of the class raised their hand. So I think when we think about the ways that we work, it's definitely doesn't exist in this professional space, exclusively. And so it's just my mission as a Native woman, as a California Indian, as an Amah Mutsun woman to uplift and center and advocate for Indigenous women and also the Native community at large in any space I occupy and in any space I choose to come into, and whoever my audience is. And I did see another question about centering whose land you're on, and I think this kind of relates tangentially to that, at least. And I want to just say, yes, it's always best to show up as an ally. Whether you're showing up as a perfect ally is another story, but we need people to show up for us. And so, yes, always acknowledge the land that you're on, and always center Indigenous voices whenever you can, because we have been marginalized for way too long, and we really rely on, one, our communities, but two, our allies, our non-Indigenous allies.
Thank you very much, Athena. Thank you. And that is it's after 3, and I know that they did want to end at 3 o'clock. I thought it was 2:30, my fault. But I want to thank the panel for just making just such a tremendous and important presentation. It's good for our Amah Mutsun youth, and I believe for many other youths, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to see this, to see how people are working to for the betterment of themselves and the betterment of their communities. And that's why we need to move forward. And as I always say, we need to move forward together. And so we ask people to join us, to support us when and where you can, and to ask for our support when we can provide that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Please remember to fill out the survey if you can, and blessings to everyone. Oh.